Xenoblade Chronicles X Definitive Edition previews have now been released, and holy moly, there are a lot of great quality of life changes that have been made to this game. As always, I'll be going through and breaking down all of the new details that we know, whilst giving you my own personal take on what we can still expect to see in the future. So if you enjoy this type of content, I'd appreciate it if you'd click that subscribe button and notification bell, as it's free and helps me out a ton. With that all out of the way, let's jump right into it. To begin with, let's start by getting the bigger announcements out of the way, like the removal of division points and field skills. In the original game, players would choose between one of 8 divisions near the start of the game, each of which is specialized towards a particular task and profession on Mira. For example, Harriers acting as the muscle of NLA would be purposed with defeating enemies. Reclaimers are primarily looking for survivors and treasure on Mira from the White Whale, and Pathfinders are tasked with planting probes and exploring further afield. Needless to say, each player would choose which division they initially wanted to be a part of, and would then be able to increase their blade level by performing these specific special tasks. Each blade level then allowed the player to upgrade one of their field skills, which would then allow them to unlock higher level treasure and install more probes. But this whole system has now been removed. Instead, the player will now be able to access most of these treasures from the get-go, and those that are still locked will now be tied to the player's progression, as completing certain quests will unlock them over time. It's not clear as of right now whether these are side or main story quests, but based on some info I stumbled upon from a German journalist with a preview code, these unlocks may be tied to brand new off-the-record missions. Originally, these were the final requirement for upgrading the field skills to level 5, and for obvious reasons, there's no need for these quests to still exist now, so my guess is that these new off-the-record missions will be how we unlock treasures and objectives around the map. Continuing, according to RPG sites and a few other sources, the player will now receive different rewards as the player increases their overall survey rate percentage, ranging from money, reward tickets, or energy clips. A new item and resource which will be used to increase your quick recast meter at the bottom, allowing you to use the ability more often from the start of battle. In addition, we finally have both multiple save files and access to an actual autosave feature, which is actually super important. Aside from the obvious, like being able to have multiple playthroughs on the go at once, this will now allow for save scumming enemies and their loot, at least being a method to make the weapon and gear trait grinding a little less unbearable. If that wasn't enough, however, after 10 long years, we now also have a way to control and adjust the audio settings of this game, which means we can finally turn down the music and increase the vocals. But that isn't all. We can also now adjust the flight song audio, varying between a vocalized and instrumental version of Don't Worry. However, these are the only 2 options available, as well as dual audio, meaning we can freely swap between the English and Japanese dubs whenever we want. In extension, this also therefore allows you to swap which voice actor your custom avatar is using at any time, as for obvious reasons, it'd be a bit weird if you started and chose an English VA and then moved over to the JP version and continued with Adam Howden or whoever screaming in your ear the entire time. But it's still really nice that we can now swap this on the fly whenever we like. Monolith Soft has clearly listened to our feedback from the original game also, as they're now allowing us to adjust settings like the weather and time of day via the menu, rather than having to hunt down and remember where every red bench or blade base was located. Fashion gear has also been moved to a completely separate menu now, and has been updated to utilize the Xenoblade 1DE cosmetic system, with the player now having to unlock a cosmetic for an armor piece once and then having it for all eternity. There hasn't been any footage of this screen or menu so far, so I sadly can't confirm or deny if fashion gear now extends to your weapons also, like I've previously requested, but hey, at least it updates on the title screen now and can allow for some very funny images. A lot of care and attention has clearly been paid to how the player player is able to present themselves, with these additional features such as characters now performing idle animations when visible in the menus, and a wide variety of new cosmetic options for our characters to choose from. As of right now, I've been able to confirm hairstyles for Pyra, Mithra, Malos, Shulk, Mio, Nia, Uni, and Tyon from Xenoblade, and even styles from Xenosaga for characters like Margulis, Wilhelm, Shion, and Vanderkamp. So like with the Crane Kun situation in Xenoblade 3, perhaps there's something else in the works. The map has also gotten a massive glow up, now with improved quest tracking, heart-to-hearts now being displayed on the map when available, and even info given on each Frontier Nav segment, providing hints towards the player on what they need to do to increase their survey rate. And lastly, we have some of the new features that I am most happy to see. Finally, Xenoblade Chronicles X now has some degree of actual functioning tutorials. Similar to Xenoblade 3, you'll be able to enter the menu at any time and read up on exactly how specific gameplay mechanics and anything else operates within the game. But that isn't all. I've said previously that one of the best features in any RPG I've played within this decade has to be Final Fantasy XVI's real-time lore events, allowing the player to recount the events of the story so far and seek further info on anything they don't fully understand right now. And Xenoblade X Definitive Edition has its own version, reminiscent of the Xenosaga database that we had oh so long ago. And I hope this is a clear indicator of what Monolith intends to keep doing in their games to come. That pretty much sums up the general quality of life changes that have been made, but we still need to go through all of the combat related ones, such as there now being an EXP share mechanic. No longer will the player be forced to take each party member one by one to the Divine Roost, where we can roast a bunch of high level bugs alive to have them hit their level cap as quickly as possible, as now each party member will level up alongside one another and should stay roughly the same level throughout. On top of this being a great change, it's also been confirmed that certain party members are no longer required to do certain story or affinity missions, instead allowing the player to choose whoever they like to accompany them on their journey. I'm admittedly a tad skeptical at this info, as we know via this screenshot that there will be times when the player is unable to freely swap a party member in and out of the party, which I originally thought were these moments, but perhaps it's pointing towards some more specific moments in the story. That said, either way, you'll be spoiled for choice on who to bring with you, as we now have confirmation of there being 22 party members which you can access throughout the main story of the game. At present, I predict that the new party members will be Gajag, both a Photon Saber and Sniper user, based on the awesome designs that the Rothian arms manufacturer creates, Neonail, who will wield Psycho Launchers, the White Masked character, or as I'm referring to them at the moment, Reina Sakuraba, using both a longsword and Gatling or ray gun, and finally the Lone Hero, being unique by wielding a javelin and a multi-gun, a relatively niche weapon type. This is largely based off of the fact that we know that there will be a new orange melee art for longswords, meaning that at least one of the new party members will wield them, whilst the rest is purely conjecture and chosen specifically for some of the weaker weapon types in the game. Just look at Psycho Launcher's pitiful selection of arts. No wonder Galactic Knight is considered so difficult to play in the early game. I will say, there is still the possibility that we may see one more additional party member, which is unlocked after completing the main story, similarly to Melia and Nia in Xenoblade 3, in which case I'd assume that it would be the Lone Hero, as that makes the most sense and would be the perfect fit, leaving one additional slot open, maybe for Tatsu, seeing as there were voice lines in the files for the original game suggesting he may at one point been planned to be playable. I specify that there will be only one additional party member, however, as the UI is designed in such a way where if there were to, this part and this part would be touching, which is reaching Civ 7 levels of terrible UI, and I can't rule out the possibility either that our reward for completing the game may just be the return of Lao. So either way, we'll have plenty of new friends to try out. If this seems a tad overwhelming at first glance, do not worry, as once again, Monolith have got you covered. Unlike the original game, BP, which is used to level up your arts and skills, is completely refundable, allowing the player to swap to a different combat style and experiment to aid in that even further. They've even gone and taken one of my ideas, which I talked about years ago, about making a training area where the player can practice and experiment with different builds and strategies. Kind of feels like someone at Monolith might watch my videos. Probably not. To further improve the accessibility of the game, strides are also being taken, although we don't have complete details as of yet. A user on Twitter responded to an inquiry relating to how late in the game the player receives the skull and its flight upgrade, stating that whilst they can't provide any details for right now, as the embargo only allows for content up to Chapter 4 to be shared at this time, they did confirm that Monolith has made arrangements in this regard. My guess would be that specifically the flight upgrade would be available earlier than before, previously requiring Chapter 9 to have been completed, as Chapter 5 gives us access to Overdrive, and Chapter 6 allows us to access our scale for the first time, both of which are relevant to the events of their story chapter. So perhaps Chapter 7 will serve the additional purpose of giving the ability to fly, which I guess makes it a tad less pointless. Furthermore, another difference between the original JP and Western releases of the game was when you gain access to the special missions, which gave you a way of quickly acquiring EXP, BP, and affinity for your party members, being accessible from the get-go in the JP version and locked behind story completion in the Western release. Admittedly, another negative aspect of the localized release, but I'm glad to say that now in the definitive edition, these missions all unlock after the completion of Chapter 3, meaning that we now have a way to easily up our levels, combat efficiency, and affinity on a whim anytime that we need to. Finally, the last few details I've found relate to a couple of different options in the settings, specifically the Heresfelg Skell and the Global Nemesis fights. Starting with the former, due to the unique transformation form of this Skell, it appears the Heresfelg will possess a unique control scheme compared to flight of all of the other skells, allowing you to adjust both the controls and camera settings during its cruise mode. Meanwhile, at least for the 1.1 version of the game which these people had access to, it appears to be that only the Telethia Plume and Yggdrasil Zero will be global nemesis battles, meaning that the previously cut Zufag fight hasn't been added in yet. Whilst there's always the possibility of this being updated and changed at a later time, it's still a shame that this won't be here at launch, so I guess we'll have to wait and see if any new global nemesises are added in the future. Before wrapping up this video, there's a few details relating to the new story content being added that I want to talk about, but this section will contain potential spoilers, so continue at your own discretion. As I mentioned before, the embargo that was lifted was specifically on content up until Chapter 4, which meant that none of the reviewers or journalists have shown or talked about info past that point. Or at least they weren't supposed to. A Spanish YouTuber by the name of Puerta Al Satano did provide some vague insight into this new content, stating that the final chapter is pretty long and it's not just some new content or story to close things out, and that, in his opinion, it's pretty crazy what they've prepared. For obvious reasons, he couldn't give specific details, although I'll bet he's already said too much, but did mention that it will close some subjects, link others, and introduce a lot more content than at first glance. Additionally, multiple sources also reiterated the fact that this new story content is unlike Future Connected and Redeemed, in that it can't be accessed by a separate menu, and instead requires the player to progress through the main story, which is what I originally wanted in the first place. Additionally, we can also make some educated guesses into the length of this additional DLC story, thanks to the knowledge of how many achievements will be be in this game. The Wii U version originally had a total of 749 different achievements, split across story, world, and combat categories, but the definitive edition now seems to only possess 741. What's interesting, however, is that the amount of story chapters between each game has increased significantly, adding at a minimum 33 new achievements. In addition, we also know that every single one of the previous chapters in the game possessed 3 to 5 different achievements each, and so based on this information, we could see at most 7 new story chapters added to the definitive edition of the game. Even so, I still think it's far more likely that we'll see something closer to 3 additional story chapters, as we have to consider that there will likely be new quests, affinity missions, and other things that will also take up some slots, but this still allows us to get a rough idea on how long we can expect this new content to be. That aside, I'm also going to take this opportunity to quickly bring up some extra info pertaining to this new story area, which I've been looking for an opportunity to talk about. For instance, as many of you are probably aware, a short while ago, Nintendo of America tweeted out a new image of this area, showcasing that there is a deposit of black fog beneath this structure. As a reminder, as was confirmed by Takahashi in the Ionius Moments art book, the black fog in Xenoblade 3 was the result of both separate worlds approaching one another, each within their own unique space, whilst the fog beasts were different creatures being projected into this other world. On a basic fundamental level then, the requirement for black fog to exist would require at least 2 separate spaces at the same time, being drawn or linked to one another by one force or another, and this consequently means that this specific area, or even possibly Mira and the space surrounding itself, are in their own special space like this. Now, this doesn't outright confirm any of the Ogdoad stuff I've been talking about for a while, as it is possible that this is the result of Mira's unique space and the Xenoblade X universe coming into contact with one another via some medium, possibly some form of origin-like structure or device, but it certainly doesn't rule it out either. Further evidence can even be found from talking to Professor B, who, despite his original world having discovered most of their universe, had never encountered or seen a Nopon before. Now, on its own, this might not feel significant, except for the fact that when it comes to Xenoblade, Nopon seemingly exist everywhere, both on Mira and the worlds of Ulrest and Bionis. There's even the detail in Xenoblade 2 that showcased that Nopon didn't evolve from Klaus's actions, suggesting that they arrived some other way. The point is that the existence of the black fog on Mira and the addition of this extra information does confirm that there are at least 2 different spaces at work here at minimum, which gets me very excited to see what Monolith still have up their sleeve. That's all I have for you today, and apologies for this video taking so long to come out. I've been trying to hunt down any additional information relating to this topic from the Dengeki Nintendo magazine and anywhere else I can find it, so it's taken a tad longer than normal to compile it all. That said, I hope you found this video informative and have enjoyed it. Now that we're less than a month away from X's release, I'll be ramping up production on a ton of videos, so make sure to stay tuned and subscribe to the channel if you don't want to miss out on any of the latest Xenoblade X Definitive Edition content. I thank you all for watching though, and I'll catch you in the next one. This is JB, signing off.